I was on my way to the meeting about my husband's inheritance. As I got into my car, a homeless man rushed over and shouted, "Ma'am, don't start that car. Your daughter-in-law." My blood froze, but when I arrived at the meeting, she fainted. "I'm glad to have you here." Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought a Tuesday morning could change everything. At 64, I believed I had seen it all, weathered every storm life could throw at me. Harold's death 3 months ago had been devastating enough, but I was managing, taking it one day at a time, just like he would have wanted. The call from the attorney's office came exactly at 9 a.m. "Mrs. Whitmore, we're ready to proceed with the estate settlement. Can you be here at 2 o'clock today?" The woman's voice was professional, almost cold. I agreed, of course. After months of waiting, I was eager to finally close this chapter and move forward. I chose my navy blue dress, the one Harold always said brought out my eyes. He bought it for me on our 35th wedding anniversary, just 2 years ago. As I clasped the pearl necklace he gave me for our wedding, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed older, more fragile than I remembered. 3 months of grief had carved new lines around my eyes, turned my auburn hair more silver than I cared to admit. The drive to downtown took longer than expected. Traffic was heavier than usual, and I found myself drumming my fingers nervously on the steering wheel. I wasn't sure why I felt so anxious. This should have been straightforward. Harold and I had discussed his will many times over the years. Everything was supposed to come to me, with provisions for our son Michael and his family after my passing. I pulled into the parking garage beneath the law office building, my hands slightly trembling as I turned off the engine. The concrete walls felt cold and unwelcoming. I gathered my purse and the folder of documents I'd been asked to bring, took a deep breath, and headed toward the elevator. That's when I heard the voice. Ma'am, wait." I turned to see a man approaching me from behind one of the concrete pillars. He was probably in his 50s, wearing clothes that had seen better days. A worn jacket, faded jeans, scuffed boots. His hair was unkempt, and he had the weathered look of someone who spent too much time outdoors. My first instinct was to keep walking, maybe even run. Harold had always warned me about being alone in parking garages. But something in his eyes stopped me. They weren't threatening or wild. They were concerned, almost desperate. "Please, ma'am, I need to tell you something important," he said, staying a respectful distance away. "You're Mrs. Whitmore, right? Harold's widow?" My heart began pounding. How did this stranger know my name? Know about Harold? "I don't know who you are, but I need you to leave me alone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while reaching for my phone. "Ma'am, please. I know how this looks, but I worked for Morrison & Associates upstairs. I was let go 3 weeks ago, but before they fired me, I overheard things about your husband's will." I froze. Morrison & Associates was Harold's law firm, the same firm I was about to meet with. The man glanced around nervously, as if checking to make sure we weren't being watched. "Your daughter-in-law, Maisie. She's been in contact with certain people at the firm. There are documents, things she's had prepared." My mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" "Ma'am, I can't prove it yet, but I think she's been planning to alter your husband's will. She's been telling people you're not mentally competent to handle the estate. She has medical records, statements from people claiming you've been acting confused, forgetful." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the side of my car for support. "That's impossible. I've never been diagnosed with anything. I'm perfectly fine." "I know, ma'am. That's why I've been waiting here, hoping to catch you before the meeting. She wasn't expecting you to show up today. She told Mr. Morrison you probably wouldn't even remember the appointment." My anger flared, overriding my fear. How dare she? How dare anyone question my mental state? The man nodded sympathetically. "There's more, ma'am. She's been forging documents, making it look like your husband wanted to change his will in his final weeks. She has fake medical reports saying he was concerned about your ability to manage finances." I felt like I was drowning. None of this made sense. Harold had never expressed any concerns about me managing money. If anything, I was the one who handled most of our finances throughout our marriage. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, studying his face for any sign of deception. "Because I liked your husband, ma'am. He was always kind to me when he came to the office. And because what they're doing isn't right, I may not have much, but I still have my conscience. I looked at this stranger, this homeless man who was risking whatever little he had left to warn me. "What's your name?" "Eddie, ma'am. Eddie Kowalski. I was a paralegal at Morrison and Associates for 12 years before they decided I knew too much about their side business." "Side business?" Eddie glanced around again. "They've been helping certain clients manipulate wills and estates, taking large fees for making inconvenient family members disappear from inheritance documents. Your daughter-in-law has been paying them very well." The elevator dinged in the distance, and Eddie stepped back. "Ma'am, you need to be very careful in there. They're expecting you to just sign papers without reading them carefully. Don't let them pressure you into anything." Before I could ask more questions, he melted back into the shadows between the cars. I stood there for several minutes, my mind reeling from everything he'd told me. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as the ravings of a disturbed man, but something deep in my gut told me he was telling the truth. I thought about Maisie, my daughter-in-law of 8 years. She had always been sweet to my face, but I'd noticed little things over the years. The way she whispered to Michael when I entered a room. How she always seemed to steer conversations away from me during family gatherings. The subtle looks of irritation when I spoke about Harold and our life together. With shaking hands, I pressed the elevator button. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Eddie watching me from behind a pillar, his expression filled with worry. The ride to the 15th floor felt eternal. When the doors opened, I stepped into the plush reception area of Morrison and Associates. The mahogany furniture and expensive artwork that once impressed me now seemed sinister, like a beautiful trap designed to lure unsuspecting victims. "Mrs. Whitmore," the receptionist said with a practiced smile. "They're waiting for you in conference room A." As I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking on the polished marble floor, I noticed how quiet everything seemed. Too quiet. Most of the office doors were closed, and I could hear muffled conversations behind them. I paused outside conference room A, my hand on the brass handle. Through the frosted glass, I could see several figures seated around a large table. I recognized one silhouette immediately, Maisie's petite frame and distinctive hair. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. The room was exactly as I expected. Intimidating. 3 men in expensive suits sat on one side of the table, with Maisie on the other side. She looked up as I entered, and for just a moment, I saw something flash across her face. Surprise? Fear? It was gone so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. Then she smiled, that same sweet smile she'd been giving me for 8 years. "Oh, Mildred, I didn't think you were coming today." The way she said it confirmed everything Eddie had told me. "Hello, Maisie," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Of course I'm here. This is about my husband's estate." The lead attorney, a thin man with silver hair and cold eyes, gestured to an empty chair. "Mrs. Whitmore, please have a seat. We have several documents that require your signature today." As I sat down, I noticed Maisie fidgeting with her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger repeatedly. She wouldn't meet my eyes directly, instead focusing on the stack of papers in front of her. "Before we begin," I said, placing my purse firmly on the table, "I'd like to understand exactly what we're discussing today. My husband and I went over his will many times. I'm familiar with his wishes." The attorney exchanged a quick glance with his colleagues. "Mrs. Whitmore, there have been some recent developments. Your husband made certain amendments to his will in his final weeks, expressing concerns about—" "Stop," I interrupted, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "What kind of concerns?" Maisie finally looked at me, her eyes wide with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Mildred, Harold was worried about your health. He mentioned several incidents where you seemed confused, forgetful. He wanted to make sure the estate was handled properly." The words felt like a slap across my face. "Incidents? What incidents?" One of the other attorneys slid a folder across the table. "Mrs. Whitmore, we have documentation of several occasions where family members noted concerning behavior, memory lapses, confusion about dates and names, difficulty managing household finances." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were what appeared to be medical reports, written statements, even photographs. My breath caught as I recognized Maisie's handwriting on one of the statements, dated just 6 weeks ago. Mildred became extremely agitated when asked about grocery shopping. I read aloud. She couldn't remember what she had purchased or how much money she had spent. When Michael tried to help her organize her receipts, she accused him of trying to steal from her. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. This is completely false. I have never accused Michael of stealing anything. Mildred? Maisie's voice was soft, almost pitying. You did say those things. We were all very worried about you. That's why Harold decided he needed to make arrangements. I stared at her, this woman I had welcomed into my family, who had sat at my dinner table countless times, who had smiled and hugged me at every holiday gathering. The person looking back at me now was a stranger. What arrangements? I managed to ask. The lead attorney cleared his throat. Your husband amended his will to establish a trust. The estate would be managed by a trustee. In this case, your son Michael, with provisions for your care and living expenses. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. You're telling me Harold didn't trust me to handle my own finances? It wasn't about trust, Maisie said quickly. It was about protection. Harold loved you so much, Mildred. He just wanted to make sure you were taken care of. I closed my eyes, trying to process what was happening. When I opened them again, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of the conference room, I spotted a small recording device, its red light blinking steadily. Are you recording this meeting? I asked. The attorneys looked uncomfortable. It's standard practice for estate settlements, one of them said. Standard practice to record a grieving widow without her consent? Before anyone could answer, there was a soft knock on the door. A secretary peered in. Mr. Morrison? There's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent. The lead attorney frowned. We're in the middle of a meeting. Sir, he says his name is Eddie Kowalski, and he has information about this case. I watched as all the color drained from Maisie's face. She looked like she might be sick. I don't know anyone by that name, Morrison said quickly. Tell him we're busy. Actually, I said, standing up, I'd like to hear what Mr. Kowalski has to say. Mildred, I don't think that's necessary, Maisie said, her voice higher than usual. We should just focus on getting through these documents. But it was too late. Eddie appeared in the doorway, looking cleaner than he had in the parking garage, but still obviously out of place in the expensive law office. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, nodding at me respectfully. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have something you need to see. Morrison stood up abruptly. Sir, you're trespassing. I'm calling security. Go ahead, Eddie said calmly. But first, Mrs. Whitmore should know that I have copies of the original documents. The real ones, from before they were altered. The room went dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Eddie reached into a worn messenger bag and pulled out a manila folder. I made copies before they fired me. Your husband's original will, dated 6 months ago. And the real medical reports from his doctor, not the fake ones they created. Maisie suddenly stood up, swaying slightly. I don't feel well, she mumbled. Sit down, Maisie, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. You're going to want to hear this. Eddie opened the folder and pulled out several documents. Mrs. Whitmore, your husband never changed his will. These people, he gestured to the attorneys, have been working with your daughter-in-law to create false documents. They forged your husband's signature and fabricated medical reports to make it look like he questioned your mental capacity. That's preposterous, Morrison sputtered. This man is clearly disturbed. We have witnesses to Mr. Whitmore's concerns about his wife's condition. You mean the witnesses your firm paid? Eddie asked calmly. I have the receipts for those payments too. Maisie made a small whimpering sound and suddenly collapsed back into her chair, her face white as paper. For a moment, I thought she had fainted, but her eyes were still open, darting frantically around the room like a trapped animal. Why? I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do this to me? Maisie's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. Michael and I have debts, Mildred. The house, his business, everything is mortgaged to the limit. You needed to steal from me. I finished for her. Eddie placed the original will in front of me. Mrs. Whitmore, this is your husband's real will, signed and witnessed properly. Everything he owned goes to you, exactly as you believed. I looked down at Harold's familiar signature, the one I had seen him write thousands of times over our 42 years of marriage. Seeing it there, real and unchanged, brought tears to my eyes. How long have you been planning this? I asked Maisie. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. It wasn't supposed to hurt you. We were going to make sure you were comfortable. The trust would have provided for everything you needed. While you controlled every penny, I said. Morrison was frantically shuffling papers, probably trying to hide evidence. Mrs. Whitmore, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting. No, I said firmly. We're going to finish this right now. I looked around the room at these people who had tried to rob me of my husband's final gift to me. Not just his money, but his trust. The woman who had smiled at me while plotting behind my back. The attorneys who had been willing to fabricate documents for the right price. But I also looked at Eddie, this man who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking up for me. A man who had risked whatever little stability he had left to make sure I knew the truth. What happens now? I asked him. Eddie looked at the attorneys with disgust. Now we call the police. As he reached for his phone, Maisie let out a small sob and slumped forward, finally fainting for real this time. But I felt no sympathy for her. The woman who had just collapsed wasn't the daughter-in-law I thought I knew. She was a stranger who had been wearing my daughter-in-law's face for 8 years. And I was about to find out just how deep her deception ran. The police arrived within 20 minutes, but those 20 minutes felt like hours. Maisie had regained consciousness and sat slumped in her chair, no longer bothering to maintain her innocent facade. The sweet, caring daughter-in-law I thought I knew had vanished completely, replaced by someone I didn't recognize at all. Detective Sarah Chen was a woman about my age, with kind but sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She listened patiently as Eddie explained what he knew, examining the documents he had brought with calm professionalism. Mrs. Whitmore, she said after reviewing everything, I'm going to need you to tell me about your relationship with your daughter-in-law. Start from the beginning. I found myself thinking back to 8 years ago, when Michael first brought Maisie home to meet us. She had been 25 then, working as a dental hygienist, seemingly sweet and genuinely in love with my son. Harold and I had welcomed her with open arms. She was perfect, I told Detective Chen. Too perfect, I realize now. She always said exactly what we wanted to hear, always agreed with everything Harold and I said. I thought she was just trying to fit in. As I spoke, memories started shifting in my mind, like puzzle pieces rearranging themselves into a clearer picture. Things that had seemed innocent at the time now took on a darker meaning. About 3 years ago, she started making little comments, I continued. Nothing obvious, just small suggestions that maybe I was getting forgetful. She'd ask if I remembered conversations we'd supposedly had, events that I was certain had never happened. Maisie looked up at me then, her eyes red and swollen. Mildred, I was genuinely concerned. No, I cut her off, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. You were planting seeds, making me question my own memory. Detective Chen turned to Eddie. Mr. Kowalski, can you tell me more about what you witnessed at the law firm? Eddie pulled out a small notebook, his hands remarkably steady considering his situation. About 6 months ago, Mrs. Maisie Whitmore started coming to the office regularly. At first, Mr. Morrison told us she was just asking about estate planning for her husband's family. But then the meetings became more secretive. He flipped through his notebook. I started paying attention because something felt wrong. She would bring documents that she claimed were from doctors, statements from family friends, even photographs that were supposed to show Mrs. Whitmore in confused states. What kind of photographs? Detective Chen asked. Maisie shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Eddie looked at her with disgust before answering. Pictures of Mrs. Whitmore at the grocery store, at the bank, at family gatherings, but they were taken from far away and the captions were lies. One photo showed Mrs. Whitmore at a checkout counter, and Maisie's statement claimed she had been confused about money and unable to complete her purchase. but I could see in the photo that Mrs. Whitmore was simply chatting with the cashier while her groceries were being bagged. My hands clenched into fists. The violation felt almost physical. "You were following me? Taking pictures of me?" Maisie's voice was barely a whisper. "I needed documentation. The lawyers said they needed evidence." "Evidence of what? Of me living my normal life?" Detective Chen made notes as she spoke. "Mrs. Whitmore, were you aware of any financial difficulties your son and daughter-in-law might have been experiencing?" I shook my head. Michael always seemed to be doing well. He has his own consulting business. They live in a beautiful house in Maple Ridge. They take expensive vacations every year. All funded by debt, Maisie said suddenly, her voice bitter. "The house has 2 mortgages. The business is barely breaking even. The vacations went on credit cards. We owe over $300,000. The number hit me like a punch to the stomach. 300,000? How is that possible? Michael's business started failing 2 years ago. Maisie continued, tears streaming down her face again. He was too proud to tell you and Harold. He kept borrowing money, thinking he could turn it around. When Harold got sick, we realized the inheritance might be our only way out. I stared at her, trying to process this information. My son, struggling financially for 2 years, and he hadn't said a word to us. Harold would have helped in an instant if he had known. So instead of asking for help, you decided to steal from me, I said. It wasn't stealing, Maisie protested weakly. You would have been taken care of. The trust would have covered all your expenses, Eddie snorted. A trust that would have paid you $40,000 a year while the rest of the estate went to cover your debts. I saw the calculations, Mrs. Whitmore. They were planning to use your husband's money to pay off their credit cards and mortgages while keeping you on what amounted to an allowance. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about money. This was about my son and his wife systematically planning to control every aspect of my life. Does Michael know? I asked Maisie. Is he part of this? She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. He knows about the debts, she said finally, and he knows we were hoping the inheritance would solve our problems, but he doesn't know about the fake documents or the lies about your mental state. He thinks Harold really did change his will because he was concerned about you. Detective Chen looked up from her notes. So your husband believes his father genuinely thought his mother was becoming incompetent? Maisie nodded miserably. I've been telling him stories for months. Little incidents that supposedly happened when he wasn't around. I made him believe that Harold was worried about your memory, your decision-making abilities. The room felt like it was spinning. Not only had Maisie been lying to me, she had been poisoning my relationship with my own son, making him believe his father had lost faith in me. What incidents? I demanded. Maisie looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. I told him you forgot to turn off the stove and nearly started a fire, that you got lost driving to the grocery store, that you accused the mailman of stealing from you, that you hid money around the house and then forgot where you put it. Each lie felt like a physical blow. None of that ever happened. I know, she whispered. Detective Chen closed her notebook. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to come to the station to give a formal statement. And I'll need copies of all these documents. She looked at the attorneys who had been sitting silently through the entire conversation. Gentlemen, we'll be investigating your involvement in this matter as well. Morrison finally spoke up. Detective, we were acting on information provided to us by our client. If that information was falsified, we're as much victims here as Mrs. Whitmore. Eddie laughed bitterly. Victims? You charged them $50,000 to forge documents and fabricate evidence. I have copies of your invoices. The lead attorney's face went white. That's not. We don't. Save it, Detective Chen said. You can explain it all downtown. As the police began gathering evidence and taking statements, I found myself looking at Maisie one more time. This woman who had shared holidays with us, who had hugged me and called me mom, who had sat beside Harold's hospital bed during his final days. Was any of it real? I asked her. The last 8 years, the family dinners, the conversations we had, was any of it real? Maisie looked up at me with genuine tears in her eyes. At first, yes. When I met Michael, when we got married, I really did care about you and Harold, but when the money problems started getting worse, when we realized how much the estate was worth, she didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I understood. Somewhere along the way, her love for my son had turned into something darker. Desperation had transformed her from the woman who had genuinely cared about our family into someone willing to destroy me to save herself. As Detective Chen prepared to escort everyone out, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. If Eddie hadn't warned me, if he hadn't risked everything to tell me the truth, I would have walked into this meeting completely unprepared. I would have signed those papers, believing my beloved Harold had lost faith in me in his final weeks. I would have spent the rest of my life thinking my husband had died, believing I was incompetent, while his money was used to pay for the very lies that had convinced him I couldn't be trusted. The thought was so horrific that I had to sit down again, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. But then I looked at Eddie, this unlikely guardian angel who had saved me from a fate worse than losing my inheritance. He had given me back something infinitely more precious, the truth about Harold's faith in me. Now I had to decide what to do with that truth. 3 days after the police station, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone. Michael had called 17 times since Detective Chen had contacted him. 17 calls I hadn't answered because I wasn't ready to hear his voice, wasn't ready to know how much of his wife's poison he had absorbed. Eddie had come by twice, bringing me copies of documents and checking to make sure I was all right. This man who lived out of his car cared more about my well-being than my own daughter-in-law had. The irony wasn't lost on me. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock, just as I had expected. Through the peephole, I could see Michael standing on my porch, his face haggard and his usually perfect hair disheveled. Next to him stood Maisie, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Mom," Michael said, his voice cracking on the single word. "We need to talk." I studied my son's face, searching for signs of the man I had raised. He looked exhausted, older than his 33 years. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his clothes looked like he had slept in them. "Do we?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Please, Mom. Let us come in. Let us explain." I stepped aside, but only because I needed to hear what he had to say. I needed to know how much he knew, how much he had participated in his wife's scheme. They sat on the couch Harold and I had picked out together 15 years ago, the same couch where we had welcomed Maisie into our family when Michael first brought her home, the same couch where we had shared countless family moments that now felt tainted by lies. "Detective Chen told me everything," Michael said without preamble, "about the fake documents, the forged medical reports, the lies about Dad changing his will." I remained standing, my arms crossed. And I had no idea, Mom. I swear to you, I had no idea Maisie was doing any of that. I looked at him carefully. This son I had given birth to, raised, loved unconditionally for 33 years. "But you knew about the debts." His face crumpled. "Yes. We're drowning, Mom. The business is failing. We owe money everywhere, and I was too ashamed to tell you and Dad. I kept thinking I could fix it, that I could turn things around before you ever had to know. So when Harold got sick, you started thinking about the inheritance." Michael flinched as if I had slapped him. "Not like that. Not the way you're making it sound." "Then how?" Maisie spoke up for the first time since entering my house. "Michael, tell her the truth. All of it." I turned to look at her, surprised. The woman sitting on my couch looked nothing like the confident manipulator I had seen at the law office. She looked broken, defeated. Michael ran his hands through his hair. "When Dad got his diagnosis, when we knew he only had months left, I started panicking about what would happen to you after he was gone. You'd be all alone in this big house, managing everything by yourself." "I'm 64, Michael, not 94. "I know. But Maisie started pointing out little things, times when you seemed confused or forgetful. She said Dad had mentioned being worried about you." I felt my anger flare. "What little things?" Michael looked uncomfortable. "Like when you forgot about our dinner plans last Christmas. Or when you couldn't remember the name of our neighbor's new dog. Or when you put the milk in the pantry instead of the refrigerator." I stared at him in disbelief. "Michael, you canceled dinner at the last minute because Maisie got sick. The neighbor's dog is named Butterscotch, and I knew that perfectly well. And putting milk in the pantry once after working in the garden for 3 hours doesn't make me senile. The confusion on his face was genuine. He looked from me to Maisie and back again. But Maisie said, "Maisie lied," I said flatly, "about everything." Maisie was crying again, silent tears streaming down her face. "I twisted things," she whispered. "I took normal, everyday moments and made them sound like symptoms of dementia. I made you see problems that weren't there." Michael looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. "Why would you do that?" "Because I was desperate," Maisie said. "Because we were losing everything. And I thought if you believed your mother needed help managing the estate, maybe you'd be more willing to let us handle things for her." "Handle things," I repeated. "You mean steal from me?" "No," Maisie protested weakly. "We would have taken care of you. You would have had everything you needed. Under your control," I said. $40,000 a year while you used Harold's money to pay off your credit cards and mortgages." Michael's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "Ask your wife about the trust she had the lawyers draw up. Ask her about how much of the estate was going to be used to pay your debts while I lived on an allowance." I watched as understanding dawned on Michael's face, the horror, the realization of just how thoroughly he had been manipulated by his own wife. "Maisie," he said, his voice barely audible, "tell me she's wrong." Maisie couldn't meet his eyes. "The lawyers said it was the best way to protect everyone's interests." "Everyone's interests?" Michael exploded, jumping up from the couch. "You were planning to steal my mother's inheritance?" "We were drowning," Maisie screamed back, her composure finally cracking completely. "Your business was failing. We owed money to everyone, and you were too proud to ask for help. I was trying to save us by destroying my mother." The raw pain in Michael's voice cut through my anger. I could see him realizing not just what Maisie had done, but how she had used his love for me against both of us. How she had made him complicit in doubting his own mother while believing he was protecting me. "Michael," I said quietly, "sit down." He sank back onto the couch, looking like a man who had just discovered his entire life was built on lies. "I want you to understand something," I continued. "Your father never doubted me. Not once. Not ever. His will was never changed. He never questioned my ability to manage our affairs. The man you knew, the father who raised you, that man trusted me completely until the day he died." Michael broke down then, sobbing like he had when he was a little boy. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I believed her. I should have known you better than that." "You should have," I agreed, "but she was very good at what she did." I looked at Maisie, who was staring at her hands in her lap. "How long have you been planning this? When did you decide I was the enemy?" "You were never the enemy," she said. "But when the debt started piling up, when we realized we might lose everything, I started thinking about the inheritance differently. Your husband's estate is worth over $2 million, Mildred. That money could solve all our problems. That money was Harold's life's work. Money he saved so I could live comfortably after he was gone." "You don't need $2 million, Maisie said, a flash of her old resentment showing through. "You live simply. You don't travel. You don't spend money on expensive things. That money would just sit there while we lost our house, our car, everything we've worked for." And there it was, the real Maisie, the woman who believed she deserved Harold's money more than I did, because she would spend it while I would save it. The woman who had convinced herself that stealing from me was actually noble, because I didn't deserve what my husband had left me. Michael looked at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. "Maisie, how could you think like that? How could you believe you had any right to Mom's inheritance?" "Because she doesn't need it," Maisie shouted. "Because we do. Because you were too stubborn and proud to ask for help when we needed it. So instead of asking, you decided to take?" I said. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Maisie's crying and Michael's ragged breathing. Finally, Michael spoke. "Mom, what happens now?" I had been asking myself the same question for 3 days. What did happen now? My daughter-in-law had tried to steal my inheritance through an elaborate scheme involving forged documents and false medical reports. My son had been manipulated into doubting his own mother's competence. The lawyers who were supposed to protect Harold's wishes had been willing to fabricate evidence for the right price. But underneath all of that was a deeper question. Could this family be saved? I looked at Michael, at the genuine remorse and horror on his face. Then I looked at Maisie, still defiant even in her defeat. "That depends," I said finally, "on what you're both willing to do to make this right." The silence in my living room stretched on for what felt like hours. Michael sat with his head in his hands, while Maisie stared at the floor, her tears finally spent. I remained standing, waiting for one of them to speak first, to show me who they really were beneath all the lies and desperation. It was Michael who broke the silence. "What do you want us to do, Mom?" I had spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about that question. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? Or something harder to define? The restoration of trust that might be impossible to rebuild? "I want the truth," I said. "All of it. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment when you chose to doubt me instead of trust me." Michael lifted his head, his eyes red and swollen. "I'll tell you everything I know. But Mom, I swear to you, I thought I was protecting you. Maisie convinced me that Dad was worried about your memory, that he wanted to make sure you were taken care of." "How?" I asked. "What exactly did she tell you?" Michael glanced at his wife, who still wouldn't look up from the floor. "She said Dad had mentioned it to her during one of his doctor visits, that he was concerned about leaving you alone with so much responsibility." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Maisie was with Harold at his doctor visits?" "Sometimes," Michael said. "When I couldn't get away from work. She offered to drive him, to help him keep track of his medications and appointments." I turned to look at Maisie. "You used my husband's illness as an opportunity to manipulate my son." Finally, she looked up at me. "Harold never said anything about being worried about you, but he was so weak during those last months, so dependent on everyone around him. It made it easy to suggest that maybe he should be thinking about what would happen to you after he was gone." "Suggest to whom?" I demanded. "To Michael. I would mention things when we got home from the appointments. Little comments about how frail Harold was getting, how much he was depending on you for everything. I made it sound like Harold was concerned about burdening you." The betrayal cut deeper than I had thought possible. This woman had used my husband's final months, when he was at his most vulnerable, to plant seeds of doubt about me in our son's mind. "What else?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the rage building inside me. Maisie wiped her nose with a tissue. "I started paying attention to everything you did. Every time you forgot where you put your keys, every time you had to ask someone to repeat themselves, every normal thing that happens to everyone every day. I would mention it to Michael later, make it sound concerning. And you believed her," I said to Michael. "She was so subtle about it, Mom. She never said you were having problems directly. She would just mention things casually, like she was worried but didn't want to make a big deal about it. Over time, it started to seem like there was a pattern. I thought back over the past year, trying to remember interactions with both of them. Had I noticed Maisie paying unusual attention to my words and actions? Had there been signs I had missed? "The photographs," I said suddenly. "When did you start following me?" Maisie shifted uncomfortably. "About 4 months ago. The lawyers said they would need documentation if we were going to challenge your competency." "Challenge my competency?" I repeated. "You were planning to have me declared mentally unfit." "No," Michael said quickly. "That's not what we discussed." "That's exactly what we discussed," Maisie snapped, turning to face her husband. "Michael, stop pretending you didn't know what this was about. We talked about setting up a conservatorship, about making sure your mother was protected from making bad financial decisions." Michael's face went white. "I thought we were talking about helping her manage things, not taking away her rights." "They're the same thing," Maisie said. "A conservatorship would have protected her while making sure the money was used responsibly." "Responsibly?" I said. "You mean to pay off your debts?" "The debts were destroying us," Maisie said, her voice rising again. "Do you have any idea what it's like to lose everything? To have creditors calling you every day? To know that you're going to lose your house, your car, everything you've worked for? Do you have any idea what it's like to discover that your own family has been plotting against you?" I shot back. "To learn that the people you trusted most in the world were planning to have you declared incompetent so they could steal your money?" "We weren't going to steal anything," Michael protested weakly. "The trust would have provided for you." "Michael," I said, My voice gentler now because I could see he was finally understanding what had really been planned. The trust Maisie and the lawyers designed would have given me $40,000 a year to live on while the rest of Harold's estate paid off your debts. After that money was gone, what then? He stared at me, the full implications finally sinking in. There wouldn't have been anything left. Nothing, I confirmed. Your father worked for 45 years, saved every penny he could, invested carefully, and built an estate that would have allowed me to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Your wife's plan would have wiped it out in 5 years. Maisie stood up suddenly, her face flushed with anger. This is all easy for you to judge, Mildred. You've never been in debt. You've never faced losing everything. You don't know what desperation feels like. You're right, I said. I don't know what it feels like to be in your situation, but I know what it feels like to be betrayed by people I love. And I know what it feels like to discover that someone I welcomed into my family was willing to destroy me to save herself. I wasn't trying to destroy you, Maisie said. I was trying to save my marriage, my family, my life, at the cost of mine. The words hung in the air between us. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine recognition in Maisie's eyes. She finally understood what she had done, what she had been willing to do. Michael stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the garden Harold and I had planted together 20 years ago. What happens to us now, Mom? To our family? It was the question I had been dreading. Because the truth was, I didn't know if we could come back from this. Trust, once broken so completely, might be impossible to repair. The lawyers will face criminal charges, I said. Eddie has provided enough evidence to prove they were involved in document forgery and fraud. And Maisie? Michael asked without turning around. I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had seemed so perfect when Michael first brought her home. That depends on what she does next. What do you mean? Maisie asked. Detective Chen told me that if you cooperate fully with the investigation, if you testify against the lawyers and help expose how this scheme worked, the district attorney might be willing to consider a plea agreement. And if I don't, then you'll face the full consequences of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy charges. Eddie's evidence is thorough enough to convict you without your cooperation. Maisie sank back down onto the couch. What kind of plea agreement? I don't know, I admitted. That would be between you, your lawyer, and the district attorney. But Maisie, you need to understand something. Even if you avoid prison, even if you get probation or community service, this doesn't go away. You tried to steal from me. You manipulated my son into doubting me. You used my husband's illness to further your scheme. I know, she whispered. Do you? I asked. Because 5 minutes ago you were still defending what you did. You were still acting like I didn't deserve the money Harold left me. Maisie looked up at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. I was wrong. I can see that now. I let desperation turn me into someone I don't recognize. Someone willing to destroy an innocent person to get what you wanted. Yes, it was such a small word, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. Finally, an admission without excuses or justifications. Michael turned back from the window. Mom, is there any way? Is there any possibility that we can fix this? That our family can survive this? I looked at my son, this man I had raised to be honest and kind, who had been manipulated into participating in his own mother's betrayal. Then I looked at Maisie, who had orchestrated it all. I don't know, I said honestly, but I know what has to happen first. They both waited for me to continue. Maisie has to face the consequences of what she's done. She has to cooperate with the police, testify against the lawyers, and accept whatever punishment the court decides is appropriate. And Michael, you have to decide whether you can stay married to someone who was willing to do this to your mother. Michael's face crumpled. Mom, she's my wife. I love her. I know you do, I said gently, but love isn't always enough. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and she didn't just betray me. She manipulated you, lied to you, used your love for me against both of us. I can change, Maisie said desperately. I can be better. I can earn back your trust. Can you? I asked, because this wasn't a moment of weakness, Maisie. This was months of planning, Months of lies, months of watching me go about my daily life while plotting to destroy it. This was who you chose to be. The room fell silent again. Outside, I could hear children playing in the neighborhood, the normal sounds of life continuing while my world had been turned upside down. "What do you want from us?" Michael asked finally. "I want you to choose," I said. "Both of you. Choose who you want to be going forward. Choose whether you want to be people who can live with the consequences of your actions, or people who keep making excuses for them." It wasn't the answer they wanted, but it was the only one I had. Because the truth was, I couldn't make this decision for them. I couldn't force Michael to leave his wife, and I couldn't force Maisie to become a different person. All I could do was decide what I was willing to accept in my own life, and I was no longer willing to accept being betrayed by people who claimed to love me. 6 months later, I sat in my garden on a crisp October morning, watching the leaves change color on the maple tree Harold and I had planted for Michael's 10th birthday. The seasons had a way of putting things in perspective. What seemed permanent and unchangeable in spring could be transformed completely by fall. Maisie had taken the plea agreement. 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and full restitution of the legal fees that had been paid to Morrison and Associates. The lawyers had received prison sentences. Morrison got 4 years, his associates got 2 years each. Eddie had been key to their convictions, his detailed documentation and brave testimony, ensuring they faced the full consequences of their actions. But the legal resolution was only part of the story. The real healing had taken much longer and was still ongoing. Michael had moved out of the house he shared with Maisie 3 weeks after our confrontation in my living room. He was living in a small apartment downtown now, trying to figure out who he was without the weight of her manipulation influencing his every decision. "I keep second-guessing everything," he had told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "Every memory, every conversation, every decision I made over the past few years. How much of it was really me, and how much was her telling me what to think?" It was a question I understood all too well. I had spent months doing the same thing, replaying conversations and interactions, trying to separate truth from the carefully crafted lies that had been woven into my daily life. The divorce proceedings were almost complete. Michael had discovered even more deception as lawyers went through their finances. Credit cards opened in his name without his knowledge, loans taken out against his business, spending that Maisie had hidden from him for years. The financial situation was worse than either of us had realized. I had offered to help with the debts, but Michael had refused. "Mom, I can't take your money to clean up the mess my wife made," he had said. "I need to figure this out on my own, the right way this time." It was a decision I respected, even though it pained me to watch him struggle. He had sold the house in Maple Ridge, was driving a 10-year-old Honda instead of his BMW, and was working 16-hour days to rebuild his consulting business from the ground up. But there was something different about him now, a sense of purpose and integrity that reminded me of the man I had raised him to be. Eddie had become an unexpected fixture in my life. I had hired him as a part-time groundskeeper for my property, and he was living in the small apartment above Harold's workshop. Watching him transform from a desperate man living out of his car to someone with stability and purpose had been one of the few bright spots in this difficult time. "Mrs. W.," he called out as he walked across the lawn, carrying a tray with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might like some company this morning." I smiled as he settled into the chair beside me. "Thank you, Eddie. How are you feeling about today?" Today was the day Maisie's probation officer was coming to verify her community service hours. She had been assigned to work at a local food bank, helping to prepare and serve meals for people experiencing homelessness. People like Eddie had been just months ago. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. "I hope she's learning something," Eddie said thoughtfully. "Not everyone who ends up desperate makes the choices she made." It was true. Eddie had lost his job, his home, his stability, but he had never lost his moral compass. When faced with the opportunity to profit from wrongdoing, he had chosen to do what was right, even when it cost him everything. "Have you heard from her lately?" I asked. Eddie nodded. "She comes to the food bank sometimes when I'm there picking up supplies for the church. She doesn't say much, but she works hard. I think she's finally starting to understand what desperation really looks like." I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Part of me wanted Maisie to suffer, to truly comprehend the harm she had caused, but a larger part of me just wanted her to become a better person. Someone who would never again be capable of the cruelty she had shown me. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Michael. "Coffee later. I have some news." I showed the message to Eddie, who raised an eyebrow. "Think it's good news or bad news? With Michael these days, it's usually both," I replied. That afternoon, Michael arrived at my house looking better than he had in months. He had gained back some of the weight he had lost during the stress of the divorce, and there was color in his cheeks again. "You look good," I told him as we settled in the kitchen with our coffee. "I feel good, Mom. Really good. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living my own life instead of trying to manage someone else's crises." He pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of a small storefront with Whitmore Consulting painted on the window. "I signed the lease yesterday. My own office, my own business, built the right way this time." Pride swelled in my chest. "Harold would be so proud of you." "I hope so," Michael said. "I've been thinking about him a lot lately, about the values he tried to teach me, the kind of man he wanted me to become. I lost sight of that for a while." "We all did," I said gently, "but we found our way back." Michael reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I squeezed his hand. "Always. Can you ever forgive me? Really forgive me? Not just say the words because you love me?" It was a question I had been asking myself for months. Could I truly forgive my son for doubting me, for being manipulated into participating in a scheme that could have destroyed my life? "Michael," I said carefully, "forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's a choice I make every day. Some days it's easier than others." His eyes filled with tears. "I understand. But yes," I continued, "I can forgive you. I have forgiven you, because I can see that you were a victim too. Maisie used your love for me against both of us, and that wasn't your fault. It feels like it was my fault. I should have known better. I should have trusted you more than I trusted her." "You should have," I agreed. "But you didn't, and we can't change that. What we can do is build something better going forward." Michael wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "What does that look like?" "It looks like honesty," I said. "Complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. It looks like you coming to me when you're struggling instead of trying to handle everything alone. It looks like us rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. And if I mess up again," I smiled, "then we'll deal with it together. But Michael, you're not the same man you were 6 months ago. You've learned something about yourself, about what you're capable of when you're desperate. That knowledge will protect you from making the same mistakes again." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the long journey that had brought us to this moment. "What about Maisie?" Michael asked finally. "What about her? Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive her?" I considered the question carefully. I don't know. What she did was calculated, deliberate, cruel. She didn't just make a mistake or let desperation cloud her judgment for a moment. She spent months planning to destroy me, and she enjoyed doing it. She says she's changed. Maybe she has. People can change, Michael. But forgiveness isn't about whether someone has changed. It's about whether I'm willing to carry the burden of anger and resentment. And I've decided I'm not. "So you have forgiven her?" "I've let go of the anger," I clarified. "That's not the same as forgiveness. And it's certainly not the same as trust. Maisie will never be welcome in my life again. But I refuse to let her steal any more of my peace." Michael nodded. "I think I understand." As he prepared to leave, I walked him to the door. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. It was the kind of sunset Harold and I used to watch together from our back porch, his hand in mine as we talked about our dreams for the future. "Mom," Michael said as he hugged me goodbye, "thank you for not giving up on me." "Thank you for finding your way back," I replied. After he left, I walked through my house, this home Harold and I had built together over 4 decades of marriage. The rooms were quiet, but not lonely. I had thought that losing Harold would mean facing the rest of my life alone, but I had discovered something important over these past months. I wasn't alone. I had people in my life who genuinely cared about me. Eddie, whose loyalty and courage had saved me from a terrible fate. Michael, who was working every day to become the man he was meant to be. Detective Chen, who still called to check on me. Even the staff at the food bank where Maisie was doing her community service, who had become friends after I started volunteering there myself. I had a life full of purpose and meaning. I was tutoring adults learning to read at the local library, helping Eddie expand the garden behind the workshop, and working with Detective Chen's department to help other seniors recognize and avoid financial exploitation schemes. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my own story. For months, Maisie had been writing a narrative where I was a confused, incompetent old woman who couldn't be trusted with my own life, but that was never true. I was a strong, intelligent woman who had survived 42 years of marriage, raised a son, built a life, and faced down people who tried to destroy me. That evening, as I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. Not the peace of having everything I wanted, but the peace of knowing exactly who I was and what I was worth. Harold's love lived on in the security he had provided for me, in the values he had taught our son, in the beautiful life we had built together. Maisie's scheme had failed not just because Eddie had exposed it, but because the foundation Harold and I had built was stronger than the lies she had tried to construct on top of it. I was 64 years old, and I was just beginning the best chapter of my life. The thought would have seemed impossible 6 months ago, but now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I was free. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.